In the name of Allah, the gracious, the merciful. For the video presentation on the YouTube, I'm reading out to you my article on the Qur'aan and blood circulation. In Surah 96, verse 2, the Qur'an says, خَلَقَ الْإِنسَانَ مِنْ عَلَقٍ, which means Allah created a human being from alaq. The accepted meaning of alaq is that initial embryonic stage when it is in the form of a leech-like clot of blood clinging to or suspended from the wall of the uterus. At this stage, although there is a rudimentary formation of the human cardiovascular, that is, blood circulatory system, the heart has not started beating and the embryo has not yet acquired distinct human characteristics. In a later revealed surah, surah number 86, however, the Qur'an speaks of another ingredient or raw material other than alaq, which has gone into the making of insan. Verses 5 to 8 of the surah, that is surah number 86, run as follows. فَلْيَنْظُرِ الْإِنسَانُ مِمَّا خُلِقَ مِنْ مَاءٍ دَافِقٍ يَخْرُجُ مِنْ بَيْنِ الصِّلْبِ وَالتَّرَائِبِ إِنَّهُ عَلَى رَجْعِهِ لَقَادِرٌ. English translation of this Arabic verse is, Insan should then consider, that is, human being should then consider by what means she has been created. She has been created by means of a gushing fluid. Which fluid comes out from between the spine and the ribs. Verily, indeed, capable of its return. The fluid that is verily, indeed, capable of its return. I am aware of I am aware that the translation I have given in the above paragraph is not the orthodox one, but then, as anybody can see, the orthodox translation has deviated from the plain meaning of the words used in the Qur'an to suit the translator's own ideas about the message the verses are conveying. The preconceived idea of the translators is that the gushing fluid referred to in the above quoted verses of Surah number 86 is semen that spurts out of the male organ penis during the sexual act. But with this preconceived idea, the translators had a problem. Semen obviously does not gush out from between the backbone and the ribs, nor for that matter is it produced there. Then is the word of Allah, na'uzu billah, wrong? No, explain the translators. The semen producing organs are originally embedded in the fetus, as per them, between the backbone and the ribs, but they gradually descend until birth of the child to their position at birth between the legs. Even an adolescent can say that the translator's above explanation is nothing but stretching of their imaginations in a vain bid to justify their interpretation of the divine verses. There are other explanations given which are equally unconvincing. Such justifications cannot but cast doubts on the veracity of the Qur'an being the word of Allah. And Allah says of the Qur'an, ذَلِكَ الْكِتَابُ لَا رَيْبَ فِيهِ. That is, this is the book wherein there is no doubt. This verse is number 2 of Surah number 2. The Quran itself says that the meaning of some of the verses may not be clear to mankind initially for some period of time because of the limits of its, that is, mankind's knowledge. But soon will we allow them our signs in the regions and in their own souls until it becomes manifest to them that this that is Qur'an, is the truth. I am reading out to you the translation of verse 53 of Surah number 41. It is therefore imperative for true believers to stick to the plain meaning of the Quranic verses and refrain from devious interpretations, even when the plain meaning is not understandable. The expanding sphere of human knowledge may make the meaning clear at some future point of time. Let me read out to you verse 53 of Surah number 41, quote unquote. Soon will we show them our signs in the regions and in their own souls until it becomes manifest to them that this Qur'an is the truth. That is the translation of verse 53 in Surah number 41. It is therefore imperative for true believers to stick to the plain meaning of the Quranic verses and refrain from devious interpretations, even when the plain meaning is not understandable. The expanding sphere of human knowledge may make the meaning clear at some future point of time. Let me proceed. The main meaning of the verses under consideration that is verses number 5 to 7 of Surah number 86 is that Allah created insan by means of the fluid that gushes out from the cavity enclosed by the back on one side and the ribs on the other. Let me repeat. The plain meaning of the verses under consideration, that is verses 5 to 7 of Surah number 86, is that Allah created insan, that is man, by means of the fluid that gushes out from the cavity enclosed by the back on one side and the ribs on the other. At the time, in the 7th century AD, when these verses were revealed, people could not understand the full implication of the verses. The level of their knowledge about the intricacies of the human body was too low. They could not then understand as to what fluid could gush out of the said cavity that is between the backbone and the ribs. It was only 10 centuries later when the English physician William Harvey announced his discovery of blood circulating around the body in a closed circuit that mankind became aware of blood gushing out of the heart located in the cavity formed by the ribs and the backbone. Now we know how the pumping action of the heart makes the blood gush out of the aorta. So now we know that fluid. So now we know what fluid it is that gushes out of the exact place described in the Qur'aan. The fluid is nothing but blood. Why then do we, the people of the modern age, not accept this simple truth? Why do we still insist that the fluid is semen, when deep down in our hearts we know that semen does not spurt out from the spot in the human body so exactly described in the said verses? After the creation of the first man and woman by Allah, semen, of course, is the source derived from man for the creation of Adam and Eve's succeeding progeny. But semen is not the only source. The other source is the female egg. Neither of these two sources, however, can be said to be the ready-to-use materials from which insan is created. After fertilization, the two sources together have to undergo numerous changes till the formation in the uterus of what Allah calls alaq. Now, this alaq is the ready-to-use material with which insan is created, as stated by Allah Himself in verse 2 of Surah number 96. With the tremendous advances made in human knowledge during the last 14 centuries since the revelation of the Qur'an, we now know that alaq, or the leech-shaped embryo in the mother's womb, has the rudimentary, that is undeveloped, forms of the heart and the network of blood vessels. The rudimentary heart and blood vessel network is even filled with blood. the tiny embryo's own distinctive blood and not the mother's. But there is no heartbeat and no consequent circulation of the blood. Alaq is thus merely the source from which a human being is to be created. But it is not an insan yet. Except for the cardiovascular system, no other organ system has reached a functional state therein. To read it again, except for the cardiovascular system, no other organ system has reached a functional state therein. In fact, there is not even a rudimentary formation of any other distinctly human organ at this stage. The Qur'an says in verse 2 of Surah number 96, I repeat, that alaq is the material from which insan is created. But alaq is not insan. It is only a raw material for the latter. Something else other than alaq is therefore logically required for the creation of insan. It is my humble submission that the verses 5 to 8 of Surah number 86 provide a clue to the other thing required. Let me read that sentence again. It is my humble submission that the verses 5 to 8 of Surah number 86 provide a clue to the other being required, to the other thing required. This other thing cannot be semen for the obvious reason that semen has already gone into the making of alaq. As explained in para 7 above, the gushing fluid referred to in verses 5 to 8 of Surah number 86 could only be blood. As explained herein above, the gushing fluid referred to in verses 5 to 8 of Surah number 86 could only be blood. One may, however, ask, how could blood be the thing other than alaq from which a living insan is created, when blood might be part of alaq itself? Yes, it is not blood per se which is the other thing required, but it is the gushing fluid, that is blood, together with the motive force behind it, which is required to convert alaq into a living being, that is insan. When blood stops gushing out of the heart, life ceases to exist. As a necessary corollary to this statement of fact, one has to admit that life begins when the heart in the embryo starts ticking and blood starts gushing out therefrom at the beginning of the 4th week after conception. It is with this gushing blood that primitive organs are formed and the embryo takes distinctly human shape by the end of the 8th week. Without this gushing blood, the embryo would not develop into the infant capable of coming out into the world and continuing to live therein. Even after birth, the creating and developing work of the gushing blood continues till the infant turns into a fully developed insan. It is this gushing blood which sustains every cell of the body by regularly supplying oxygen and nourishment to it and draining out wastes therefrom. Without this gushing blood, the cells would all be dead. Life would cease to exist, and there would be no insan. In the light of the above discussion, is there any doubt now that along with alaq, it is the blood gushing out from the heart by means of which insan has been created and sustained? Is there any doubt now that the gushing fluid referred to in the verses 5 and 6 of Surah number 86 is not semen but blood gushing out of the heart? Is there any doubt now that the said verses had revealed a scientific truth in the 7th century when the truth dawned on the scientific world only when this truth dawned on the scientific world only over 1,000 years later? Is there any doubt now that the Qur'aan is the book of Allah? Only those will have doubts who are deaf, dumb, blind, and therefore do not understand. This is the quote from verse 171 of Surah number 2. The verse number 8 of Surah number 86 is generally so translated as to mean that Allah is capable of resurrecting insan on the day of judgment after his death in this world. The crucial word in the verse is raj'ihi. Raji, of course, means return. But what does he, meaning his, its, pertain to? To insan or to gushing fluid? Both referred to in the preceding verses. In the traditional translation, of course, he has been taken to mean his and is construed to pertain to insan, occurring in the earlier verse number 5. But the interpretation of verse 8 thus made appears to be rather contrived. This contrivance was naturally to be expected from interpreters, translators at the time of the revelation of the verses and for centuries later, because of the limitation of human knowledge about the intricacies of the human body at that time. If the verse were to be then interpreted to mean the gushing fluid was capable of return to where it originated from, if the verse were to be then interpreted to mean that the gushing fluid was capable of return to where it originated from, it would make no sense to the people living then. But now, this interpretation would not only make sense, but would be a natural corollary to the interpretation given to the immediately preceding verses above in this write-up. Look at the implication of this interpretation. The Holy Qur'an had revealed the fact of blood circulation in the human body long back in the 7th century, whereas the world of science came to know of it about 1,000 years later. But alas, most of humanity would persist in being summum bukmun umyun fahum la yaqilun, the deaf and dumb and therefore do not understand. That is the meaning of verse number 171 in Surah number 2. It has now come to my knowledge that after I first wrote the above piece, that blood circulation was first discovered not by William Harvey but by a Muslim, Ibn Nafis, in the 12th century AD itself. But even then, the fact remains that blood circulation was first revealed earlier in the Qur'an. Thank you.